to another episode of Frenchie's Forge. In this episode, we're going to be continuing the knife build that we got going for Mr. Odo. Hello, Odo. Kind of like the Motorola thing.
Hello, Moto.
I don't think I've ever called you Odo before, but we're going to go with it. Hello, Odo. Yes, I'm very weird and strange. Anyway, your knife is coming along super fantastically, and cannot wait to wrap it up in this episode. We've got the handle material pretty much ready, and in fact, I have it clamped up here and was just kind of going through and cleaning up the sides so that we can kind of get it sized out. I think this is going to be super cool, and I'm excited to see how it turns out. I'm sure if you guys are watching this video, you already know how it turned out based on the thumbnail. But this is me from the past, and I have no idea what it looks like. Hopefully it looks really cool. Anyway, I want to start this episode off by talking about something. Somebody commented in the comments, which I very much appreciate. It's Duck Rabbit, and he has his channel that he does knife making and blacksmithing and things, Duck Rabbit Forge. If you haven't heard of him, go check him out. He's got some pretty cool stuff, and he posts pretty regularly. Seems like a really good guy, and is really excited about doing knife making and blacksmithing, and that's really cool to see. But his comment was that doing file knives to make sure that they're not case hardened. And I thought that that was a really good point. It's not something I've really talked about. So if you are new to knife making or you haven't made a knife out of a file, it is really important to know what that is. What is that? What is a case hardened file? A case hardened file is a file that is not hardened all the way through the entire metal. It's really just hardened on the outer surfaces, whereas a through hardened file will be completely heat treated and completely hardened all the way through the metal. So really, there's no way to tell which file you have in your hand without cracking it open and taking a look inside. So prior to making this knife for John, I did a test, as I do with all file knives, beforehand. So I know I can either make a knife without having to heat treat it, or in some cases, case hardened files can be good knives. They just have to be heat treated. So I'll grab the piece here that was the leftover off of the file that John gave me. So this actually used to be like this. This is pretty much the file that he gave me here. And with the angle grinder, we cut that part off and did all this business. But I did take this into the vise and I broke off a piece. And hopefully the camera will pick this up somewhat good. Okay, so now that we're over here and we're in better light, I can get a little bit better picture of what we're talking about here. Here is a close-up of the file that we broke for John, and this is what the metal grain structure looks like in his knife here. You can see that it's pretty dull and small grain and very matte colored, and that is good. That's what we're looking for. Over here, I have a couple more examples, and in fact, this middle one here is the end of a file. So, you know, the closer you get to the tang, the softer and possibly larger grain that you're going to find. But this is a file that I tested, and it pretty much looked like that all the way through, from the tang all the way to the tip. And I would assume that this is what a case hardened file is, where you have really large grain in the middle and then just a small portion of the outside looks good. So hopefully you can kind of pick that up and see the difference and understand kind of the differences between them. The piece on the right is just a piece of annealed steel. You can see that the grain is rather large. It's really sparkly and sandy. And then you have the one in the middle that is not as bad as the one on the right, but you can tell that it's still pretty coarse. And then you have the one on the left, which is a good hardened piece of steel that resembles what this file is looking like. So anyway, hopefully that kind of helps clear it up. And I really appreciate the comment, because I feel like that's good to talk about, especially for somebody who's, you know, just getting into knife making and wants to try their hand at making a knife out of a file. These handles, we're going to start by squaring everything up. On this here, you can see that we don't have this black liner down here. That's because in the glue up, it got shifted a little bit. So we're just going to continue to grind this until we start to see that liner. And one good tip on this, especially with scales like this, where you have different shapes, is you want to make sure they're lined up really well. Now, if you look here, it looks like it's not. It looks like this one is slightly higher. But if you look down it this way, you can tell that they are lined up. It's just kind of misleading because some of this plastic here is scuffed over a little bit taller. But I think it's really important to line them up and clamp them and then grind them. That way you have a good, you know, mirrored image of one another as you're flattening it all out and squaring it up. So, okay, so now that we've spent a little bit of time pretty much leveling these out, we're ready to move to the next step, and that is going to be putting the pinholes in this thing, drilling out the pinholes. Now, typically on these, I would grind a little bit more and make these all level, but because we have skinnier stock here than we do here, I'm not really going to mess with that just yet. We're going to kind of leave them be for now. And we're going to go ahead and drill the holes and then move along from there. Okay, so now that we have everything lined up the way that we want it, we have some tape over the blade to help keep it in that position. We're going to drill this first hole in the back and then place one of the pins in there to keep it steady while we drill the second hole. All right, now we've got the pin in there to hold it where we want it. And we're going to go ahead and drill this second hole. And just like that, we have our pins drilled. We'll have to clean up this one here. But yeah, this part ain't going in the video because it didn't go in the hole. You can't show it not going in the hole. Okay, so I actually decided to trim off some of the scale on the bandsaw. I was feeling a little risky and decided to do that. And I am very glad that I decided to do that because
you've got a little something on your face.
Now that these are trimmed back some and we've exposed all the different liners in here and our holes that we drilled are lined up, we can flip it this way and see that we are not lined up here and here. So yeah, that's a bit of a bummer. Also down here. So I don't know what happened. But we done messed up, and that's okay because we're gonna fix it. Should this ever happen to you where you're trying to line up the scales and you've already drilled the holes and they no longer line up, really you have three options really. Option one is you can glue it up and make a crappy knife. That's not a very good option. Option two would be to start over and make new scales. That's not a great option in my mind. Or number three, you roll with the curveballs that life gives you. And I tend to like that option. So what I'm thinking to do to fix this situation is we are no longer going to be using these little tiny stakes, this tent stake. Instead, what we can do is get this relined up again to where it is like this, and make sure that the back is in line, and I'll take some time to make sure it's really in line. And then you can look in here that our holes don't line up. So what we'll do to fix that is we'll re-drill not only the knife, but we'll also re-drill these in a bigger drill bit. And what I'm going to use is this black G10 instead of the metal. And I actually don't really have a bigger metal pin stock. I do, but it's way too big. And actually, the more I was thinking about it, this black G10 I think will look really good as a pin, especially with the walnut. My brother chose this for a pin for his walnut handle knife, and it looked really good. Plus, we have the black liners in here too, so the pins will match those liners, and I think in the end product it'll look pretty good. So what we're going to do to fix it is just that. We're going to reline it up, re-drill the holes in here to accept this 1/4 inch G10 pin, and then we'll re-drill the tang to make the holes bigger. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick, and we'll cut it back on when we're ready to do the glue up. Okay, so now that we spent a little bit of time fixing our problem, we're now back in line and looking pretty good. So we're pretty much ready to glue this thing up. And again, I just spent some time already shaping out this front part here to where we won't have to try to get in there after it's glued up and hand sand this section here. So anyway, yeah, hopefully that tip helps you guys if you find yourself in this predicament where you don't line up the scales correctly in the first place. Hopefully you're smarter than me and will be able to figure that part out without screwing up. But in case that ever happens to you, you now at least have some sort of an option as to how to fix it without starting over. I also, in the mail just today, got my TRE shirt that just came in. And it is an awesome shirt. So appreciate the shirt, Eric, over at The Rivers Experience. That's what TRE stands for. Phenomenal knife maker. Blows me out of the water. So if you're looking for another channel and you don't know about his channel, then you probably haven't been looking. He's got excellent videos and really, like my channel, goes into great detail in teaching the steps of knife making, and really great resource for people who are just first starting out. So proud to rock the shirt because I really like to support the people that I like to watch. And anyway, appreciate the shirt. Let's go ahead and get this knife for John glued up. We're pretty much ready for that, so let's do it. the next day, and we have our knife glued up and ready to be worked on. We're gonna need to do quite a bit of work cleaning up this ricasso area, and I think what we're gonna do is just start by getting the scales cut back to the profile of the tang. So yeah, figure that's a pretty good place to start. So I'm gonna go ahead and start running it on a 120 grit ceramic belt and knocking this thing back to the tang. Let's do it. So I am making a switch to a higher grit, or I guess lower grit, a heavier grit belt. You really need to pay attention when you're shaping the handle, especially because we have different material here. We have walnut, we have G10, we have epoxy, and then of course we have the metal. While you're doing this, you need to kind of pay attention to what the belt is doing to the material. The speed at which you're running the belt can also affect how it interacts with the material. The reason why I'm switching it over is because sometimes with a 120 grit, or especially a higher grit belt, it can start to kind of burn the material, and we definitely don't want to do that. So by running it a little bit slower and having a 60 grit belt on here, we're going to avoid any burning of the wood, and that's how we'll go about attacking getting this back to the tang. Okay, so after spending a little bit of time on the grinder, we now have all the material knocked back to the tang, and we got this thing looking pretty good so far. I feel like this step is pretty good to do, to take your time on, especially. And when you're making a file knife, you have some decisions to make, and especially in regards to what you're going to do with the file part where it's at the top here. Are you going to smooth all this out and grind it to where all the file bits are gone and you're left with like a smooth finish? Or are you going to not touch it at all and then just have an extremely rough file part on the top? Or are you going to kind of go somewhere in between? So for this particular one, I decided to kind of go somewhere in between. And let me try to get this thing to focus. There we go. So you can see all the little lines here. And during the glue up, it's pretty much impossible to get those little lines to come out nice and clear without epoxy in them. Pretty much every one of those little lines is going to have epoxy in them. So what I have done is, now that we've knocked it back to the profile of the blade on both sides, and we've spent some time, come on, focus, guy. Sorry about that. We spent some time knocking this back to the profile of the tang, and it's looking pretty good. I was then left with all the little file marks, and pretty much what I did is I took this compass that I have, the end of this compass, it's got a pointy deal, and I've just gone in into each one of these lines and scraped out the epoxy to get it to look nicer. So that's something to think about when making a file knife. I have another one over here. I made this one out of a rasp, and this just is over here to kind of demonstrate another way to do it would be to, let me move it in the light here. It would be to just grind it all the way to a smooth finish. And then of course you can see, you know, where the epoxy falls into these little crevices here where all the file bits are. So you're not really going to be able to avoid that. That's just kind of comes with the territory of making a file knife. Yeah. But anyway, I thought I wanted to throw that in the video because if somebody's out there making a file and they get to this point and they're not sure exactly how to go about doing that, you really only have those options. You can either leave it alone and try to dig out all the epoxy. You can try to go somewhere in between, like I've done here. We've got a really clean and clear front area that then kind of gradually fades into the lines and then back out to a smooth bit on the end. I still have a little bit of work to do with it. I want to try to fade it back here in the back a little better, but there's that option, or there's the option that I did on this knife where you can just go super smooth. Anyway, so now that we're here and we've pretty much got this thing knocked back to the profile, it's looking really good. We're ready to now start shaping the material that's left on the handle. So let's bring it over to the grinder and we'll get going on that. Okay, so now that we've spent quite a bit of time on the 2x42 running through the belts, and we've also spent some time at the oscillating spindle sander and in the vise doing some hand sanding, we've got this thing looking wonderful. We are literally just a couple of steps away from finishing this thing up. So far it is just looking awesome. I really like how the liners have almost a circle to them, you know, they're almost like an oval from this point of view. Two more steps. We have the buffing behind me on the drill press here, the buffing pad. We're going to put some red compound on it and give it a buff. That will get this handle, you know, looking a little more glossy and smooth looking instead of dull, which it is right now. It's a little on the dull side, but we'll get that shined up. And then the only thing left to do after that is to put an edge on this thing. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, and then we'll wrap up this video. right, so we just finished up the knife build for John. This thing turned out super cool. I think the combination of the handle material is really cool. The epoxy, the liners, the black pins, the walnut. It just really looks wicked cool. The underside is cool where the yellow liners kind of have like a round part on this belly here on the palm swell, and the blade is kind of a satin finish. Got all the streaks going this way, and yeah, just looks really cool. The maker's mark is nice and dark, and the top turned out pretty good. Got a nice smooth finish up here, and it kind of fades into some of the file marks and then fades back out to a nice smooth finish all the way around this thing. It just looks wicked cool. So anyway, super fun build. I'm really glad that I was able to make this, and I'm really excited to give it to John. Off camera tonight, I actually just threw together a sheath for it. Decided to go with just a kind of a plain leather sheath with black and red stitching, and just thought that that combination would be pretty cool. And I think it turned out pretty good. He's right-handed, so he'll be able to wear this on his right side and you know, take it with him wherever he wants to go. So yeah, pretty cool little package. And did a little bit of tooling here. I've never done that before, and I think it turned out all right. For the most part, I'm not really a good sheath maker. I've made a few, but it's functional, and that's pretty much what matters. And hope that you learned something, or at least were entertained. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you think it turned out good? Would you have done something different? What would you like to see me make next? I still have quite a few ideas that I would really like to do. It's hard for me to pick one and just settle on it. I normally have 2 or 3 things working in the background, but I have a pretty cool idea for the next episode. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. And as always, appreciate you guys tuning in and watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.